Picture this. You wake up in this quiet, rural town in the South Carolina Low Country.
Right. Just a totally normal morning.
Exactly. You pour your coffee, you look out your kitchen window, and you see local police officers just like marching through the woods bordering your property.
Which is alarming enough on its own.
Yeah. But the thing is, they aren't looking for a person. They're holding these thermal imaging cameras scanning the tree line, and they are desperately trying to hunt down 43 escaped, federally owned laboratory monkeys.
I mean, it literally sounds like the opening scene of some science fiction thriller, right? But that is exactly what happened in November of 2024.
It's wild.
And, you know, the most startling part isn't even the escape itself. It's the fact that this multi-million-dollar, highly militarized biological supply chain was even operating right in the middle of one of the most pristine nature reserves on the East Coast to begin with.
Yeah, it makes no sense on paper. So for today's deep dive, we are pulling apart this massive stack of sources to look at Morgan Island, or as it's colloquially known locally, Monkey Island.
Right. And our mission today is to explore this absolute, just mind-bending paradox. We're going to look at how a highly invasive, pathogen-carrying colony of Indian-origin rhesus macaques somehow became the completely irreplaceable backbone of United States biodefense.
Yeah, and we have an exhaustive array of data to get through. I mean, we've got geographical surveys, historical records mapping out these crazy public health crises from the 1970s, detailed biomedical trial data, and even the text of modern political legislation.
Because it's not just a cool story.
No, not at all. Maintaining this primate colony comes with just extreme ecological and political costs.
Right. And if you are listening to this right now wondering why you should care about a bunch of monkeys in a South Carolina swamp, I promise you this touches your life directly.
Absolutely. We are talking about the safety profile of the actual vaccines you get at your local pharmacy. We're talking about the safety of the seafood you might order at a restaurant. And honestly, by the time we finish, we'll be looking at the very nature of how social animals, which includes humans, obviously, might have to adapt to survive impending climate catastrophes.
It really connects to everything. But, you know, to really grasp the scale of the contradiction here, we have to start by looking at the physical land itself.
Yeah.
Because Morgan Island is not some sterile, concrete laboratory complex.
Right. It's not a bunker.
Exactly. It is a roughly 4,500-acre barrier island, and it's situated right in the ACE Basin, which is about 15 miles southeast of Beaufort, South Carolina.
But like when you look at satellite imagery of those 4,500 acres, it's super deceiving.
Oh, completely.
Because the vast majority of that area isn't even land you can walk on. It's this intricate, constantly shifting estuarine landscape. It's mostly intertidal marshland.
Yeah, the vegetation there really tells the story of the water. So with higher salinity zones, you find these expansive fields of salt marsh cordgrass, which is specifically known as Bartina alterniflora.
Okay.
And as you move further inland into these slightly more brackish mixed waters, that cordgrass kind of fades into dense patches of black needlerush.
Right.
So out of the entire massive footprint of the island, only about 400 to 635 acres are actually elevated, solid upland habitat.
Which is tiny compared to the whole footprint. But that tiny fraction of upland is visually stunning. Like, this is the classic semi-tropical maritime forest you see in Southern Gothic movies, right?
Exactly, yeah.
You've got giant live oaks draped in Spanish moss, / pines towering in the air, southern red cedars. I mean, it feels ancient. And the human history of that specific patch of elevated dirt is incredibly heavy.
It really is.
Because before the federal government ever even thought about monkeys, this island was shaped by some of the darkest eras of American history.
Yeah. The formal European exploitation of the island began way back in 1774. That was with a land grant from King George III. And throughout the late 18th and into the 19th centuries, Morgan Island was completely consumed by the regional plantation economy.
Right, because the conditions were perfect for it.
Yeah, the climate, which averages about 65 degrees with almost 50 inches of rain a year, combined with those rich marsh soils, it just made it incredibly lucrative for cultivating cash crops. Things like rice, indigo, and this highly prized sea island cotton.
But, I mean, we have to be clear. The only reason that agrarian system functioned at all was the brutal, systematic exploitation of enslaved African labor.
Absolutely.
And the geography of Morgan Island played this massive role in shaping the culture of those enslaved populations, right? Because the island is bound by the convergence of the Morgan and Coosaw rivers, and you have these deep, fast-moving tidal creeks separating it from the mainland.
Right, so it was profoundly isolated.
Exactly. It was practically cut off.
And that physical isolation from the mainland power structures actually allowed the enslaved populations across these sea islands to retain distinct West African linguistic patterns, agricultural knowledge, and cultural traditions.
Wow.
Yeah, this geographical barrier is fundamentally what allowed the unique Gullah culture of the Lowcountry to emerge and endure over the centuries.
That's amazing.
And, the very landscape of the island still bears the marks of their physical labor today. I mean, the tidal swamps were diked and cleared literally by hand to create that whole rice culture.
Yeah, the island was basically a fortress. I read it was even used as a staging ground for the British Navy during the War of 1812.
Oh, yeah, it was highly strategic.
But then, after the Civil War and obviously the abolition of slavery in 1865, that entire agricultural machine just collapsed.
It completely ground to a halt. The island entered this long, drawn-out period of infrastructural regression.
Like, it was just abandoned.
Pretty much. Through the late 19th century, into the Great Depression, and then the post-World War II economic shifts, it was largely left alone. The land was subjected to what ecologists call benign neglect.
Benign neglect. I like that term.
Yeah, it was privately owned and maybe used for occasional timber harvesting or, hunting trips, but the heavy human footprint just vanished.
Which, ironically, was probably the best thing that could have happened to the ecosystem, right? While the rest of the East Coast was just getting paved over with suburbs and military bases and whatever, Morgan Island's maritime forest got like 100-year breather.
Exactly. The delicate balance of the estuary actually recovered.
But of course, you can't have a pristine, gorgeous island on the American coast without a real estate developer eventually noticing it.
No, of course not. So fast forward to the early 2000s, and a private entity known as Morgan Islanders Ltd. drew up plans to construct a 64-home residential development.
On that tiny piece of land?
Right on those limited 400 acres of elevated upland.
If they had built a neighborhood that dense on such a tiny footprint, I mean, the runoff alone would have suffocated the estuary. It would have devastated the ACE basin.
And the Nature Conservancy had already designated the ACE basin as one of the last great places on Earth, so the stakes were huge.
So what happened?
The environmental stakes prompted the state to intervene. In 2002, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, the SCDNR, they utilized grants from NOAA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to just purchase the island outright.
Okay. For how much?
For $20.5 million. And they bought it specifically to permanently halt that residential project.
See, this is where the story turns into this bizarre game of real estate ting pong, because the state spends over $20 million of conservation money specifically to save these trees from human condo developers.
Right.
But then, almost immediately, they lease that exact same protected land out to become a massive open-air monkey facility. Like, so we saved the trees from condo developers, but we just gave them to a few thousand monkeys.
It is a staggering contradiction, I know. But the decision wasn't random.
Okay.
The very attributes that made Morgan Island a perfect ecological sanctuary, the intense isolation, that protective ring of deep, uncrossable tidal creeks we talked about, those were the exact operational security features the federal government was desperately searching for.
Because they needed a place to put these monkeys.
Right. And to understand how that happened, we have to look at a massive public health crisis that was unfolding 1,000 miles away at the time.
Right, because, let's be clear, rhesus macaques belong in Asia, not South Carolina.
Exactly.
So this whole chain reaction started in 1978. The government of India instituted a total sudden ban on the export of rhesus macaques.
And overnight, the United States biomedical sector faced a catastrophic shortage. Because these animals are the absolute gold standard for testing vaccines and modeling infectious diseases.
So they were just cut off.
Completely cut off. Without them, critical medical research in the U.S. was effectively paralyzed.
And at the exact same time, the federal government had this secondary, terrifying problem blowing up in the Caribbean, right?
Right.
The National Institutes of Health, the NIH, they were funding the Caribbean Primate Research Center on La Parguera, which is this small island off the coast of Puerto Rico. And they had about 1,400 Indian-origin rhesus macaques down there.
But the infrastructure on La Parguera was failing. I mean, the facility was severely overcrowded, the containment fencing was totally inadequate, and the region was constantly battered by Caribbean hurricanes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the result was that these highly intelligent primates were just frequently escaping the facility and roaming free around the island.
And if you're listening to this, you might think, an escaped monkey in Puerto Rico is just a nuisance, like maybe they steal some fruit from a tourist or something.
Right. Sounds almost comical.
But it wasn't. This was a lethal public health threat because these specific macaques were known carriers of the herpes B virus. And we are going to get into the terrifying mechanics of that virus a little later, but the short version for you guys listening is it doesn't bother the monkeys at all, but if a human catches it, it has a 70 to 80% fatality rate.
Which is just astronomical.
Yeah.
So as these infected macaques began escaping and interacting with the local Puerto Rican population, the local health authorities quite reasonably panicked.
Yeah, I would too.
Right. So they demanded the immediate total eviction of the colony from the territory.
So the NIH is in this desperate bind. They are entirely cut off from the international monkey supply by India, and their only domestic supply is about to be evicted from Puerto Rico because they keep escaping and threatening the locals with a deadly virus.
Exactly. They needed a place that was physically impossible for a monkey to escape from.
And South Carolina offered Morgan Island.
Yes, because rhesus macaques generally avoid swimming in deep, fast-moving water. So the broad tidal currents of the St. Helena Sound acted as this natural moat. It was basically the ultimate inescapable biological vault.
But the logistics of this move, let's really think about how you move 1,400 wild monkeys.
It's unbelievable.
The federal government hired a contractor called Litton Bionetics in the summer of 1979 to coordinate this whole thing.
And you have to consider the biological timing of this, too.
Mhm.
They were forced to conduct this capture right during the macaques' mating season.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And mating season for rhesus macaques is characterized by extreme aggression, intense territorial disputes, and just massive physiological stress.
So you have 1,400 highly aggressive, stressed-out primates, and you have to physically trap them, shove them into transport crates, load them onto planes, and fly them 1,300 miles over the ocean.
And they did. They managed 6 massive air shipments in 1979 and then 3 more in 1980.
Wow.
They landed the planes in South Carolina, transferred the crates onto boats, barged them all the way out to Morgan Island, and just opened the doors.
See, if you randomly box up 1,400 highly social primates and drop them in a South Carolina swamp, doesn't that just cause absolute chaos? I would assume they would just tear each other apart the moment they got out of the crates.
That's exactly what the expectation was among a lot of biologists, total societal collapse. Because when you intentionally fracture a highly complex social hierarchy like that, traumatize the animals through capture and flight, and then drop them onto an alien landscape, you expect chaos and massive mortality.
How did they survive the shock?
Well, the shipping mortality rate was astoundingly low, only 0.65%, and that was predominantly affecting already vulnerable infants. But the real revelation came from the behavioral ecologists who tracked them after the release.
Okay, what did they find?
Specifically the work of Dr. Diane Chepko-Said. She documented that these macaques utilize incredibly complex social memory.
Wait, what does complex social memory actually look like in practice for a monkey?
Okay, imagine taking a massive high school, randomly putting all the students on different buses, dropping them in a completely new city, and then watching them flawlessly reassemble their exact social cliques and hierarchies within weeks.
No way.
Yes. Despite the trauma and physical separation, once the macaques hit the South Carolina upland, they actively navigated the new terrain to locate their original kin.
That's crazy.
Within months, they had entirely reestablished the precise social order they had formed back in Puerto Rico.
They rebuilt their society from memory. That is incredible. Okay, so now the government has its monkeys safely behind a wall of deep, tidal water. Their social order is stable. Now, the mandate shifts from just housing them to turning Morgan Island into this highly optimized biological factory.
Exactly. And this required intense demographic engineering. The government didn't just release them and let nature take its course. They mathematically managed the population to maximize the yield of newborn monkeys.
Right, because they need them for research. The sources show they manipulated the founding population to have a massive female bias, like about 75% of the colony was female. Why skew it so heavily?
It's the basic calculus of mammalian reproduction. A single dominant male can successfully fertilize multiple females. So if your goal is to generate the highest possible number of viable research subjects every year, you maximize the number of reproductive age females in the colony.
And the South Carolina Lowcountry turned out to be an absolute paradise for them, didn't it?
Oh, completely.
I mean, the climate was temperate, but the biggest factor was what wasn't there. There were zero natural predators.
Right.
In their native Asian habitats, they face leopards, tigers, birds of prey, but on Morgan Island, literally nothing was hunting them.
So, supported by an endless supply of human-provided food and this total absence of predation, the colony's demographic growth just exploded. By the late 1980s, the population had doubled, and by the early 2000s, it was pushing 4,000 individuals.
The reproductive numbers are wild. The data shows an average pooled pregnancy rate of nearly 80%. Even the juvenile females, who are barely mature, have a 76% pregnancy rate.
Yeah, it's highly efficient.
The live birth rate averages 71%. That means this island pumps out roughly 750 brand new baby monkeys every single year.
But an island of that size has a strict ecological carrying capacity. I mean, if you just let 750 monkeys accumulate year after year, they would strip the island bare and starve to death. The population has to be artificially stabilized.
So, to maintain that equilibrium of around 3,500 to 4,000 monkeys, the contractors execute a strictly controlled culling process, right?
Correct.
Every year, they trap and remove between 400 and 500 select primates. And those specific monkeys are then shipped off to mainland federal laboratories for experimental research.
And the bureaucracy required to manage this whole system is just a labyrinth. Like we mentioned, the state of South Carolina, the SCDNR, owns the physical dirt of the island. And they lease the use of those upland acres to private biomedical contractors for about $1.5 million a year. That money is actually funneled back into state conservation efforts, ironically.
But the state has absolutely no ownership of the animals themselves.
None. Every single monkey is the exclusive property of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the NIAID, which operates under the NIH.
And the federal government outsources the actual heavy lifting, the feeding, the trapping, the veterinary screening to private biotechnology firms through these fiercely competitive federal contracts.
Yeah, the amount of taxpayer money flowing into this is staggering. Over the years, different companies have fought for this contract. LABS of Virginia had it, then Charles River Laboratories won a bidding war in 2007.
Which triggered a whole formal protest, right?
It did, to the Government Accountability Office. Ultimately, a company called Alpha Genesis Inc., or AGI, secured the long-term operations.
And they're making a ton of money.
Oh, yeah. AGI recently secured a new $4.1 million annual contract that started in March 2023. If you look at the aggregate data, AGI has received over $110 million in federal government contracts since 2008.
That's insane.
In just the year 2024 alone, they received $19 million.
Wow. So it's essentially a heavily fortified, open-air corporate inventory warehouse. These animals are living wild in the trees, but they are tracked scientific assets.
Exactly.
And the operational security is intense. The 88-page federal management contract literally warns that the island environment poses potentially life-threatening situations to the personnel because of the diseases the monkeys carry.
Yeah, there is zero public access. Approaching the island is a federal offense, and trespassers are prosecuted aggressively. For the caretakers, the logistics are grueling.
I can imagine.
Staff must maintain a presence 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they can only access the facility by boat.
And while the monkeys do forage on native acorns, insects, and marsh vegetation, you obviously can't sustain 4,000 large mammals on a tiny island naturally.
No, you have to bring in food.
Right, so the caretakers operate these massive automated feeding stations that dispense commercial monkey chow twice a day. They have to maintain the generators, repair the massive trapping corrals, and ensure every single monkey on that island is eventually captured, given a full veterinary workup, and marked with a numerical chest tattoo so it can be tracked for its entire life.
And the obvious question a taxpayer might ask listening to all this is, why?
Right.
Why manage a perilous island environment, deal with boats, hurricanes, and wild escapes?
Hey.
Why not just build a massive concrete warehouse in Maryland and breed them in cages?
Right. If they are just federal inventory, why not put them on a shelf?
It comes down to the scientific baseline required by the FDA. These monkeys are the foundation for clinical trials that dictate the safety of global medicines. They need to be SPF-specific, pathogen-free.
Okay, SPF.
But beyond that, if you raise a highly intelligent primate in a sterile concrete box, it develops profound psychological and physiological abnormalities.
Like it gets depressed.
Yes, and its immune system doesn't develop naturally. Its stress hormones are constantly elevated.
Meaning the data you get from testing a vaccine on a highly stressed, cage-raised monkey might not even be accurate.
Precisely. The natural, free-ranging environment of Morgan Island, despite all the massive logistical headaches, produces a socially well-adjusted, physically robust primate. Their immune systems are challenged just enough by the natural environment to make them the perfect, healthy proxy for a human being.
Which pulls us directly into the core justification for this entire operation, the biomedical imperative. All this money, the security, the isolation, the federal government justifies it all in the name of national security.
And we must clarify a vital distinction based on the source material. There is absolutely no invasive laboratory testing or experimental research conducted on Morgan Island itself.
Okay, so the island is purely a secure breeding ground, a nursery.
Exactly. The monkeys are extracted, and then they are utilized as the apex biological model for human disease at mainland labs, because they share this profound anatomical, physiological, and genetic architecture with humans.
Right.
And the strategic necessity of having this colony on American soil became an urgent national security crisis in the year 2020.
This is where global geopolitics collide with the monkey colony. Because prior to 2020, the United States relied heavily on the Chinese government for its supply of laboratory primates.
We imported almost everything from them.
But when the pandemic hit, China instituted a total, sudden ban on the export of all non-human primates.
They completely severed the U.S. supply chain. NIH-sponsored reports immediately classified this as a critical vulnerability. I mean, think about it. In the middle of a desperate race to develop mRNA countermeasures for COVID-19, the U.S. found itself without the required biological models to legally and safely test them.
So the Morgan Island colony was suddenly elevated from a useful asset to a non-negotiable pillar of American biodefense. Let's look at the specific clinical applications these macaques are used for, because it's mind-blowing. If you, listening right now, have received a modern vaccine in the last few years, the safety of that injection was almost certainly verified by the descendants of the monkeys on this island. Let's start with HIV and AIDS.
Rhesus macaques are highly susceptible to SIV, the simian immunodeficiency virus. And SIV operates as a near-perfect biological proxy for modeling how the human HIV virus attacks the body.
The sources outline how researchers use these monkeys to study the granular mechanics of immune failure. For example, they study how SIV-infected memory CD4 plus T cells undergo accelerated apoptosis. How should we visualize that process? What does that actually mean?
Well, think of your CD4 plus T cells as the battlefield generals of your immune system. They coordinate the attack against infections. Apoptosis is essentially a cellular self-destruct sequence. The SIV virus doesn't just kill these cells directly. It tricks the generals into initiating their own self-destruct sequence prematurely. By observing this in the macaques, scientists can map the exact biochemical pathways the virus uses to collapse the immune system during chronic infection.
Wow. And the sources even point to a major 2024 study published in Nature Communications. They took male macaques from the Morgan Island lineage and studied how natural hormonal fluctuations impacted the behavior of those T cells.
All right.
They discovered that certain hormonal states in the males actually diminish the protective power of candidate HIV vaccines. You simply cannot get that kind of whole-body systemic reaction from a computer model or a petri dish.
You absolutely cannot.
Yeah.
And this systemic testing is also the foundation for the new wave of mRNA technology. Before advanced vaccines, like, Moderna's phase 1/23 trial for a combined SARS-CoV-2 and influenza vaccine, before they ever enter human randomization, they require extensive primate data.
The clinical trial registry, NCT 0582796, shows they use the macaques to establish reactogenicity and immunogenicity profiles. Let's define those terms for the listener.
Sure. Immunogenicity is how effectively the vaccine trains the immune system to recognize the virus. It's basically the measure of protection.
Got it.
Reactogenicity is the medical term for the immediate physical side effects, so the fever, the muscle aches, the inflammation at the injection site. By administering varying doses to the macaques, scientists can pinpoint the exact microgram dosage that maximizes protection while minimizing severe side effects. They have to ensure the dose is safe before it ever touches a human arm.
And the stakes are even higher when we look at maternal vaccines. There has been a massive push recently for RSV vaccines, the respiratory syncytial virus, designed specifically to be given to pregnant women.
The scientific strategy there is to administer the vaccine during the second or third trimester. The mother develops antibodies, and those antibodies are transferred across the placenta to the fetus, conferring passive immunity so the infant is born protected against RSV.
But the ethical barrier there is massive. You cannot ethically test an experimental vaccine on a pregnant human mother to see if it harms the fetus.
No, absolutely not. The FDA requires unequivocal proof that the vaccine is not teratogenic. Teratogenic means capable of disrupting fetal development or causing malformations.
Right.
So, trials like Pfizer's evaluation of their RSV pre-F subunit vaccine rely entirely on the macaque model. Because the macaque placenta functions incredibly similarly to a human placenta, scientists can track exactly how the vaccine components and the resulting antibodies cross the barrier, ensuring it is flawlessly safe for the developing infant.
And they are also the front line for biodefense and rare diseases, right?
Oh, yeah.
BioNTech uses them to test dose escalation for experimental Mpox RNA vaccines. They are testing needle-free DNA vaccines against the Andes virus, which causes an incredibly lethal respiratory syndrome. They even use them to develop pediatric gene therapies for Usher syndrome 1B, which is a devastating genetic disorder that causes childhood deafness and blindness. For many of these rare, complex therapies, the macaque is literally the only viable pathway to a cure.
The sheer volume of human suffering alleviated by the data extracted from this colony is undeniable.
It really is.
But this brings us back to the ugly paradox we started with. Because while these macaques are enabling life-saving therapies for humans on the mainland, their physical presence is systematically destroying the natural habitat on the island itself. The biological savior is basically acting as an ecological wrecking ball.
Let's talk about that environmental degradation, which really centers around a massive fecal crisis. Because when you drop 3,500 large omnivorous mammals onto a small patch of land, the math is simple. The waste has to go somewhere.
Right.
But interestingly, the scientific consensus on how much damage they were doing wasn't always clear.
No, it wasn't. If we look at the historical assessments, specifically a major study conducted around 2007 by researchers from the College of Charleston, led by Jeanette Klopshin, the impact actually appeared somewhat manageable.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they designed a comprehensive environmental impact assessment to track water quality and vegetation changes.
They set up testing sites across 3 tidal creeks: Morgan Creek, which directly borders the monkey colony; Back Creek, which is on the island but further away; and Rock Creek, which served as a pristine, monkey-free control site.
Right.
They were measuring temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and critically, the levels of fecal coliform bacteria.
And unsurprisingly, they found significantly elevated concentrations of fecal coliform exclusively in Morgan Creek. And to prove the source, the researchers utilized genetic ribotyping.
Wait, how do they actually know the bacteria is from a monkey and not, I don't know, a raccoon or a bird? What is genetic ribotyping?
It is essentially a genetic fingerprinting technique for bacteria.
Like CSI for poop.
Exactly like CSI for poop. They extract the Escherichia coli E. coli from the creek water, isolate its ribosomal RNA, and then match that genetic sequence directly against the E. coli found in the macaque's digestive tracts. It definitively proved the monkeys were the point source of the bacterial pollution.
Okay, so they knew it was the monkeys. But the surprising part of that 2007 study was their overall conclusion. Despite finding the monkey bacteria in the water, the levels hadn't breached the state standards for recreational water use yet.
Right.
Furthermore, when they analyzed satellite imagery from 1979 to 1999, they discovered that the arboreal canopy cover-like, the very top layer of the forest, had actually increased by 35%. So in 2007, the official scientific stance was that the monkey's impact was localized and minimal.
However, science evolves, and our tools for measuring ecological health have become exponentially more precise.
Yeah.
Nearly 2 decades later, a 2025 analysis, again from the College of Charleston, deployed vastly superior technology that shattered that optimistic conclusion.
They used high-resolution LiDAR technology alongside modern USDA satellite imagery. How does LiDAR change the picture compared to what they had in 2007?
Well, traditional satellite imagery mostly just shows you the top of the canopy, the roof of the forest, basically. But LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, shoots rapid laser pulses down from an aircraft. These lasers penetrate the gaps in the top canopy and bounce off the leaves and branches beneath it. It allows scientists to generate a highly accurate, 3-dimensional model of the entire forest structure, from the dirt all the way up.
And what that 3D model revealed was an ecological catastrophe hiding underneath the healthy-looking canopy. The LiDAR data exposed a 28% decline in mid-story vegetation density in just a 7-year window between 2013 and 2020.
The mid-story is the critical layer of shrubs, small trees, and foliage growing beneath the main canopy. And crucially, this is the layer most accessible to foraging macaques. The mapping showed that this severe vegetation loss wasn't random. It was heavily concentrated precisely along the monkeys' established travel corridors, surrounding their artificial feeding stations and bordering the main loading dock.
Wait, back up. If the government is hauling in massive barges of commercial monkey chow to feed them twice a day, why are the monkeys suddenly stripping the forest bare?
It's a matter of absolute carrying capacity. Even with supplemental feed, an artificially concentrated population of 4,000 highly active primates will continuously forage. They just do. They
Yeah.
strip bark, consume saplings, and break branches. The precipitous loss of that mid-story flora initiates a vicious ecological feedback loop.
Because without the root systems of those mid-story plants holding the earth together, you get accelerated soil erosion.
Exactly.
The forest loses its ability to regenerate naturally. The habitat is undergoing irreversible physical degradation, which makes the island incredibly vulnerable to storm surges and rising sea levels.
And the consequences extend far beyond the soil. The immense concentrated deposition of primate waste has triggered severe regulatory actions that affect the entire local economy.
Right.
The South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, the SCDHEC, continuously monitors the estuarine waters for public safety.
Because the ACE Basin is a massive commercial hub for shellfish, oysters, clams, these are filter feeders. They process massive amounts of estuarine water, meaning any pathogens in the water end up concentrated right in the seafood you eat.
Exactly. So SCDHEC monitors Shellfish Management Area 16A, which sits adjacent to Morgan Island. Recognizing the sheer scale of the fecal output, state health officials and the US FDA formally designated the island as a high-risk, non-point pollution source.
Oh, wow.
To protect the human food supply, they implemented strict boundary buffers, effectively shutting down vast swaths of the nearby estuarine waters to all commercial and recreational shellfish harvesting.
I have to ask about the scale here, because the ACE Basin is full of wildlife. You have huge flocks of migratory birds, you have massive alligators. Why is the monkey waste triggering federal closures when the native wildlife waste doesn't?
It comes down to density and biological origin. Estuaries are dynamic systems that have evolved over millennia to process and flush the waste of native, widely distributed wildlife populations. They did not evolve to process the staggering, hyper-concentrated enteric bacterial load of an artificially sustained terrestrial primate colony.
The sources provide a really stark mathematical comparison for this. If you look at the fecal coliform density of a wild duck, it's roughly 3.3 times 10 to the 7th power per gram of feces.
Right.
But if you look at the American alligator, which serves as a cold-blooded baseline for the area, their density can hit upwards of 8.0 times 10 to the 9th power.
So the macaque population acts like a constant, localized geyser of coliform bacteria.
Yeah.
The sheer volume overwhelms the natural tidal flushing mechanisms. The deep creeks simply cannot exchange the water fast enough to dilute the contamination.
And as damaging as the soil erosion the shellfish closures are, the environmental impact isn't even the most terrifying risk. The absolute most terrifying aspect of Morgan Island is what happens if the animals themselves get off the island.
Yeah, the zoonotic threat.
The very pathogens that make them so valuable to vaccine researchers make them an existential threat to the local public. Let's dig into that.
The defining epidemiological characteristic of the Morgan Island macaques is the endemic presence of macacine alpha herpes virus 1. In the medical community and the public, this is universally referred to as the herpes B virus.
The original 1,400 monkeys that were flown in from Puerto Rico back in 1979 were heavily infected with it. Today, decades later, serological surveys blood tests indicate that between 74% and 100% of all the adult rhesus monkeys on Morgan Island test positive for herpes B antibodies. Basically, the entire adult population has it.
But understanding the threat requires understanding how the virus behaves in its natural host. In macaque, herpes B functions very similarly to how the common herpes simplex virus behaves in a human.
Okay.
The vast majority of the time, it's completely asymptomatic. It might occasionally cause a mild localized lesion, but generally the virus enters a state of latency.
I like to think of it as a sleeper agent.
Oh, that's a great way to describe it.
The virus hides out deep within the sensory ganglia, like the clusters of nerve cells, and just goes completely dormant, waiting for a signal.
That's a highly accurate analogy, and the signal that wakes the sleeper agent up is environmental or physiological stress.
Such as?
The trauma of being captured in a trap, the stress of being transported in a crate, or even the intense hormonal aggression of the natural breeding season can compromise the monkey's immune suppression. The virus reactivates, and the monkey begins actively shedding the virus in its saliva, tears, and bodily fluids.
Wow.
At any given moment, about 2% to 3% of the infected population on the island is actively shedding the live virus.
And this is where the nightmare scenario begins. Cross-species transmission. If a human is exposed to that shedding virus, usually through a bite, a deep scratch, or getting infected saliva in an eye or mucous membrane, the virus does not go dormant.
No, it wakes up in an alien environment and behaves entirely differently.
In a human host, herpes B exhibits extreme neurovirulence. It bypasses normal immune defenses and aggressively invades the central nervous system.
It's awful.
The infection rapidly progresses to severe encephalomyelitis, massive inflammation of the brain and spinal cord. This leads to ascending paralysis, respiratory failure, and often coma.
The historical data is incredibly grim. For untreated human infections, the case fatality rate exceeds 70% to 80%. Even those who survive often suffer catastrophic, permanent neurological damage.
Wait, 70 to 80%? That's insane.
Yeah, 70 to 80, actually. Now, it is crucial to temper this with epidemiological reality. Interspecies transmission events are exceedingly rare. Since the virus was first officially identified in 1932, there have been fewer than 50 documented human cases globally, resulting in 21 fatalities.
But the lethality is so high that the government takes zero chances. While the virus shares some similar markers, antigenic cross-reactivity with other monkey viruses like HVP2 in baboons, herpes B is uniquely deadly to humans. This is why every single caretaker setting foot on Morgan Island has to wear extensive personal protective equipment. It's why the no trespassing signs carry the threat of federal prison. A single, unlucky encounter with a shedding monkey could be fatal.
Therefore, rigorous absolute physical containment is the highest priority. On the island itself, as we established, the primary containment is the geography. The broad tidal currents of St. Helena Sound act as the barrier.
Mostly because there was a highly anomalous event back in 2005. A single 20-pound adult male macaque somehow managed to conquer his natural fear of deep water, braved the fast-moving current, and swam off the island.
It's hard to even picture.
He just vanished into the low country. Over a week later, authorities finally captured him hanging out in a residential backyard on Ladies Island, miles away from the colony. Imagine walking onto your back porch to drink your morning coffee and making eye contact with a 20-pound monkey carrying a lethal virus.
But the island's natural moat isn't where the systemic failures actually occur. The true vulnerabilities in this supply chain exist at the mainland holding facilities.
Oh, right.
Once the monkeys are trapped and removed from Morgan Island, they're transferred to facilities operated by federal contractors for quarantine, processing, and eventual distribution to laboratories.
And the epicenter of this processing is Alfred Genesis Inc.'s massive 100-acre primary facility located in Yemassee, South Carolina. And the Yemassee facility has a very troubling documented history of mass containment breaches.
The record shows significant operational failures. In 2014, 26 monkeys breached containment and escaped the facility. 2 years later, in 2016, another 19 monkeys managed to escape into the surrounding area.
But those incidents were totally overshadowed by the most severe operational failure, which occurred incredibly recently on November 6, 2024. And this wasn't some complex, high-tech prison break.
No, it was a fundamental failure of human protocol. A caretaker simply failed to properly secure the double-door system of an enclosure. In the resulting confusion, 43 rhesus macaques pushed their way out and escaped into the dense rural woodlands of South Carolina.
This brings us back to the image we started the show with. The sheer absurdity and terror of the situation. You have local police forces deploying thermal imaging cameras, coordinating with federal contractors, actively hunting dozens of lab monkeys through the local forests.
The CEO of Alpha Genesis, Greg Westergaard, immediately launched a public relations effort to de-escalate the panic.
Which makes sense.
He issued statements clarifying that this specific group of 43 escapees were exclusively juvenile females, weighing only about 6 to 7 pounds each. He emphasized that because of their young age, they had not yet been exposed to the breeding population and were considered too young to harbor transmissible zoonotic viruses like herpes B.
He also assured the public they had never been subjected to any laboratory testing.
Right.
But, I mean, even with those assurances, if you are a local resident who knows the history of Morgan Island, the psychological terror must have been off the charts. You just hear 43 lab monkeys are loose in the woods, and panic is the only logical response.
The recovery operation was grueling and required a massive interagency response. Because these were young juveniles with absolutely no experience foraging in the wild, the working assumption was that they would remain relatively close to the facility's perimeter, drawn by the familiar sounds and smells of the captive colony.
AGI personnel, working alongside the Yamasi Police Department, spent months out in the woods. They constructed elaborate fruit-baited traps. They spent nights scanning the canopy with thermal cameras. It was a massive drain on resources. The final four monkeys weren't recaptured until January 24, 2025. They managed to survive in the South Carolina winter for almost 3 months.
It perfectly illustrates the systemic fragility of outsourcing critical biodefense infrastructure to private contractors. The government mandates millions of dollars in security, fencing, and operational protocols. And all of it was completely neutralized because one single human being forgot to lock a door.
And that visual 43 federally owned lab monkeys running loose through a residential American county was the spark that ignited a massive, fiercely bipartisan legislative push in Washington, D.C. to shut the entire system down.
This transitions us into the political firestorm currently surrounding Morgan Island. And I want to set a very clear framework for you guys listening here. Our goal is to impartially map out the political conflict exactly as it is documented in the sources.
Yes, exactly.
We are examining the legislative mechanics and the arguments being deployed by both sides, without endorsing any particular ethical stance on animal testing.
We are just looking at the facts on the ground. The November 2024 escape catalyzed an immediate, fierce backlash against the federal funding that sustains both the Morgan Island colony and the contractors at Alpha Genesis.
Animal rights organizations, prominently including People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals PETA and the White Coat Waste Project, seized upon the escape to heavily publicize AGI's operational record. They pointed to a history of citations issued by the United States Department of Agriculture.
The sources highlight a specific, critical USDA violation issued just weeks after the escape in December 2024. The citation documented an incident where 22 monkeys died preventable deaths due to operational failures at the facility. Activist groups utilized this data to construct a narrative that the operation is not only an unacceptable public safety risk, but fundamentally flawed on a humane level.
But the most potent existential threat to the Morgan Island operation didn't come from activist groups. It emerged directly from within the United States Congress.
Right.
The effort was spearheaded by U.S. Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican whose congressional district directly encompasses both Beaufort County, where the island is located, and Yamasi, the site of the mainland facility.
Which created one of the most fascinating political coalitions you will ever see in modern Washington.
Oh, absolutely.
You have staunch fiscal conservatives who are deeply critical of the $110 million in federal tax dollars handed to a private contractor over the years, teaming up with progressive animal rights activists who oppose the very concept of primate research. It is an incredibly rare bipartisan alliance united against a single federal program.
Representative Mace aggressively utilized congressional oversight mechanisms. She launched a formal inquiry, officially demanding that the USDA and the NIH brief Congress on what she characterized as a catastrophic failure to properly oversee AGI's operations. She heavily scrutinized the $19 million the company received in 2024 alone, questioning the return on investment for the taxpayer.
But her legislative agenda goes far beyond just demanding better fences, right? She is actively attempting to systematically dismantle the domestic primate research industry. She introduced a piece of legislation titled the Primates Act of 2024.
And that acronym stands for the Painful Research and Investigations on Monkeys Abused in Taxpayer-Funded Experiments Stops Act.
The mechanics of the bill are sweeping. It is explicitly designed to legally prohibit the NIH from conducting or providing federal funding for any research that causes significant pain or distress to non-human primates.
Yeah.
It mandates strict annual transparency reports regarding primate usage, and crucially, it outlines a framework for the gradual mandated relocation of all federal research monkeys to permanent sanctuaries.
Beyond the standalone bill, she has leveraged her position to insert specific, targeted language into broader House spending bills, attempting to completely defund the maintenance of Morgan Island.
Wow.
The core argument her coalition presents is that modern technology has advanced to the point where live animals are no longer necessary. They argue that AI-based computational modeling and the use of human organoids grown in laboratories have rendered macaque testing scientifically obsolete.
And this places the National Institutes of Health in a seemingly impossible, deeply entrenched defensive position. On one side, the NIH is facing lawmakers actively trying to slash the estimated $20 billion spent annually on animal testing across the government. The lawmakers point to the Yamasi escape and the USDA citations as proof the system is broken.
But on the other side, the NIH looks at the stark reality of the 2020 Chinese export ban. To the federal health agencies, maintaining a robust domestic supply of macaques is not an outdated luxury. It is an absolute non-negotiable requirement for national survival. They need these animals for rapid response to the next inevitable global pandemic or potential bioterrorism threat.
From the scientific perspective of the NIH, the technological alternatives proposed by the politicians are simply not ready. AI models are incredibly powerful for predicting protein folding, but they cannot yet simulate the chaotic, multi-organ systemic immune response of a living mammal encountering a novel virus.
Exactly.
And human organoids, which are essentially tiny clumps of specialized tissue grown in a lab, they lack bloodstreams, lymph nodes, and a functioning immune system. The NIH argues you cannot test a systemic vaccine on a clump of cells. It is a profound, currently irreconcilable clash between political oversight and biomedical policy.
So the politicians and the scientists are locked in this high-stakes debate in the halls of Washington. But while they argue over budgets and ethics, the island itself and the thousands of monkeys living on it are facing a much more immediate existential threat.
Yeah.
And this threat is coming from the very ocean that surrounds them, because the climate is changing and Morgan Island is incredibly vulnerable.
The coastal estuarine systems of the South Carolina Lowcountry are highly susceptible to the accelerating impacts of global climate change. We are talking about steadily rising sea levels eroding the marshes, combined with the increasing frequency and severity of Atlantic hurricanes.
If a catastrophic Category 4 or 5 storm were to make a direct impact on the ACE Basin, the destruction of Morgan Island's maritime forest would be apocalyptic.
Because it's already damaged.
Exactly. And remember, that forest is severely weakened because the macaques have overforaged and destroyed the mid-story vegetation that holds the soil together. The elevated upland they retreat to during high tides, the trees they sleep in to escape the water, it could all be wiped out in a single night.
But the source material reveals something truly incredible about how these specific monkeys might react to that exact kind of sudden environmental devastation. We don't have to guess, because we have a real-world documented analog.
We do.
We can look at what happened to the exact place the Morgan Island colony originally came from, Cayo Santiago, the primate research island in Puerto Rico.
In 2017, Hurricane Maria, one of the most catastrophic storms in recorded history, made a direct hit on Cayo Santiago.
The ecological devastation was near absolute. The hurricane-force winds and storm surge annihilated 63% of the island's vegetation. In a matter of hours, the storm completely eliminated the critical canopy shade.
Wow.
Without that shade, the macaques were fully exposed to daytime tropical temperatures that frequently exceed 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius.
Now, we need to remember the baseline psychology of rhesus macaques to understand why this is so profound. These are inherently aggressive, highly competitive animals. They live in strict, rigid social hierarchies, where the strong physically dominate the weak. They enforce boundaries with violence. They have absolutely zero natural inclination to share resources out of the goodness of their hearts.
But following the environmental collapse caused by Hurricane Maria, researchers from the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Exeter, who had been monitoring the colony's social networks for years, recorded a profound, completely unprecedented shift in the fundamental rules of macaque society.
The monkeys were forced into a brutal choice. They either had to share the scarce remaining patches of shade under the few surviving trees, or they would succumb to fatal heat stroke in the open sun.
Right.
And what they chose to do was incredible. They persistently increased their social tolerance. They dramatically and universally decreased their interpersonal aggression.
The researchers conducted this brilliant analysis of 10 years of social network data, comparing the pre-hurricane behaviors directly against the post-hurricane behaviors. They discovered a sudden, drastic shift in the actual evolutionary selection pressures dictating survival.
Let's look at those numbers, because they are staggering. Prior to the hurricane, a monkey's level of social tolerance, how friendly or accommodating it was, had zero statistical impact on its mortality risk. Being nice didn't help you survive. It might even get you bullied.
But post-hurricane, in the ruined, scorching landscape, the paradigm inverted. The researchers found that macaques that exhibited higher than average social tolerance were 42% less likely to die than their highly aggressive territorial peers.
Think about that.
It's like taking a cutthroat Wall Street trading floor where everyone is screaming and fighting for every last penny, and then the building catches fire. Suddenly, overnight, they turn into a cooperative commune, sharing water and helping each other navigate the smoke because the new environment demands it. The macaques literally evolved their social rules in real time to avoid cooking in the sun.
It underscores a profound scientific implication regarding climate vulnerability. This behavioral flexibility, the ability of a rigid, historically violent species to rapidly forge new social relationships and tolerate physical proximity to cope with a massive human-induced climate disturbance, indicates that survival in the coming decades may look very different than we traditionally thought.
Yeah.
If a massive storm hits Morgan Island and destroys their habitat, the monkeys' survival will likely depend not on their physical dominance, but on their capacity for sudden, widespread social cooperation.
It is the ultimate paradox. Morgan Island is a protected, state-owned conservation area that is being systematically physically degraded by the very animals the federal government placed there.
Right.
It is the source of an immense public health risk, the constant threat of a herpes B outbreak that simultaneously absolutely guarantees our national biodefense capabilities against the next great pandemic. It's a fierce ethical and political lightning rod that may ultimately be decided not by the debates in Congress, but by the trajectory of the next great Atlantic hurricane.
It forces anyone looking at the data to confront the inherent, often ugly conflicts between pure wildlife conservation, the demands of ethical scientific advancement, and the uncompromising requirements of national security. There are no clean, simple answers here. There are only overlapping layers of complexity.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We have engineered this incredibly complex, highly secure island. We spend hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars trying to manipulate nature to protect human lives from the next great viral threat.
Yeah.
But when you look at the raw data of how those monkeys on Cayo Santiago learned to instantly suppress their aggression and share the shade just to survive the aftermath of a hurricane, you have to wonder. When our own global climate crisis truly pushes humanity to the brink, when the resources run thin and the heat rises, will we be capable of the same sudden, radical cooperation as the macaques of Morgan Island?
It's a heavy question.
It is. Remember how we started this deep dive looking for a pristine, simple image of a nature sanctuary, only to find a landscape of murky, complex contradictions? The answers aren't binary. They never are. Until next time, keep diving deep.